It was a sad day when I got a call from the studios that I worked for. It was a production house in LA, and I got a phone call from someone I knew that I worked for. And she asked me, "Are you in trouble with the law?" I said, "Why? Why do you ask that?" She told me, "Well, two men came in and they told me you were in federal trouble. You were a criminal and you were breaking the law. They were wearing dark suits and they were pretty scary." Then she told me what they said. And they said, "It's not in your best interest to continue working with him any longer." I told her, "That's a complete lie. I'm not in trouble with the law. I've never broken a law in my life. I got a traffic ticket, maybe." She says, "Well, that may be, but we can no longer continue working with you. Goodbye." And then she hung up the phone. My jaw dropped. Then it dawned on me. I had those letters I got from the CIA and the NSA threatening me, saying that I had agreed never to speak about this to anyone. And that's when I realized that those threats were real, because now they have taken it to the next level. My late wife, Jilly, completely freaked out on me. When she heard this, she demanded I get out of the UFO community. She didn't want me to have anything to do with it anymore, or she threatened that she would leave me for good. I was what you would call in a pickle. I had no choice. So I worked with my friend Jeff Rentz, and he and I wrote a letter of leaving the community. And I believe the letter was on the internet for a long time, and it was called Steve Neal Walks. I also was disenchanted somewhat with the UFO community because it's very diverse and very opinionated, and I had come under attack a lot for my views. So I was pretty fed up. So I agreed to it, and I left the community. But I had one last show to do. I had already agreed before this happened to do another radio program with the Jeff Rentz program. And Jeff and I were friends, and I wasn't going to tell him I couldn't do the show. So I told her, I got one more show to do. So I did the one last show. And I even said on the show, "Jeff, I guarantee you something will happen as a result of this." Because on the show, I talked about my leaving, and then I also talked about the letter. And I said, "I'm done. Jilly's asked me to leave. I've had threats to my career. People were trying to shut me down, and I have to leave." But I said, this won't be the last of it. Trust me. And he asked me, "Well, what do you mean by that?" And I said, "Well, some sort of sign will pop up." So we did the show, and it was finished. And I went back into the living room, because this was all done on the phone in those days. And Jilly was sitting at the dining room table. The dining room table had windows that went in an L shape, and they were floor to ceiling and beam ceilings. It was a really nice living room. And she was sitting there, and she said, "Well, how did it go?" And I said, "It went pretty well, as well as can be expected, and I'm all done." She didn't say much more about it. And while we were sitting there having a cup of tea, I heard this sound, and it was the sound of a helicopter. She looked at me because she knew that I had been somewhat obsessed with the amount of helicopters that had circled our house, followed her, and harassed us for a few years. And so she looked at me with that look of, don't even think about moving and going out to look at it. But I did anyway, because it kept getting louder and louder and louder, and it was like right over the house, and it was hovering at this point. And the whole place was shaking. And I got up. She said, "Oh God, here we go." And so I went out the sliding door, and I walked out onto the lawn, and I looked, and there it was. It was a big black Sikorsky. It was hovering over the house, real close. And the pilot was inside, and he was looking right at me. We talked about this in other videos. But he was looking right at me, and I was looking right at him, and I waved, and he waved back. So I looked towards the house, and I could see her looking at me through the window, and I said, come on out here and take a look." And she said, shook, and I said, "Come on out." And I got the feeling the helicopter knew what I was doing, and they waited for her to come out. And she came out reluctantly, stood there. She says, "Okay, there's a helicopter." I said, "It's not every day you see a helicopter like this mostly black. It was like a super dark green, but it looked black, and it didn't have any markings on it. And she looked up at it, and at that moment, the pilot looked at us, and he flashed a little light at us from the bottom of the helicopter, and then he turned, and he slowly started to go off into the distance. And that was it. That was the last of it for a long time. So it seemed somewhat probable that somebody heard me on Jeff Rense and knew that I'd finally signed off. I believe it was the next day the letter went live on the internet. I had a lot of people saying, don't leave, don't give in to it. But if I hadn't, who knows what would have happened. I would have lost Jilly. I already lost my job, and it was affecting my career. I lost so many friends because they thought I was crazy and they didn't want to be anywhere near me. You know, I'd go to a party and they just kind of spread out, you know. So it's not so bad today, but it's still there. So things went pretty dark after that. I wasn't having experiences. I wasn't talking to people in the UFO community. It was really, really strange. Shortly after that time, I moved to a little house in Northridge. It was quiet there. The house was very rustic and kind of beat up and worn out, but it was more affordable. And since my career had really, really taken a hit with what I had done by going public, I mean, let me just say that I went public because once I found out I was having these experiences, I thought I should share it with people. I think it's important. I'm a straightforward human being. I work in the film industry. You know, I wasn't seeing dragons and clouds or whatever you want to call it. I didn't think I was fringe. I just felt that I could get out there and speak clearly about this stuff and say, hey, you know, I don't know what's going on, but this stuff keeps happening to people and it's happening to me, and I think it's important and we need to look into it. I didn't know that I would get the reaction I did. When I moved there, I found that it still wasn't without activity. I mean, I spend a lot of time out under the stars, looking out in the backyard, taking my dog for long walks in the dark at night. And I've seen a lot of things. I saw UFOs going across the sky that would suddenly zip really quickly across and then just disappear. I mean, before, I'm not talking about it would disappear over the horizon. I'm talking about I'd see it, it wasn't a plane, I know the difference, and it was flying along, kind of get that little staggering wobble, and then all of a sudden speed up and boom, gone. I saw this quite often. This type of activity persisted. And there wasn't much abduction activity at all, at least nothing that I noticed. If it happened, I didn't remember it. That is until one night when I found myself out on the street. There was a street light near me, and I looked down at myself and I looked back up again, and I'm in my night clothes. I had pajamas on and a t-shirt. And the first thing that came to my mind was, if the police sees me, they're going to take notice to me. And I didn't want that to happen. So I looked around, I saw the front yard of her house. And before I could move, I noticed in my peripheral vision a dark shape moving. I looked at it. I was sort of frozen looking at this thing. It had like flowing black robes. It looked like the Grim Reaper. It had a hood on. It was very black, and it kept coming at me, and then it started coming faster and faster, and I could see the robes just flowing and flowing, and it had a hood on. And when it got closer, I could see her face, the slanted black eyes, the pale skin. And she was coming right for me, and I saw her hands come out, and I could see her bony little fingers. And as she got closer, she grabbed me. I couldn't move. I was just frozen watching this. She grabbed me really hard and wrapped her arms around me. And up we went. I felt like Peter Pan. I looked down, I could see the ground receding away from me at a very high rate of speed. And I tilted my head back up like this, and there it was. A big black circle in the sky. It was all black, no lights, and we were heading right for it. And as I got closer, a sort of doorway opened up, and we went right through it. The next thing I knew, I was floating down a hallway. And the interesting thing about this hallway is it didn't look particularly alien in any way. It was very dimly lit. It almost had a yellow sort of tinge to it. I didn't catch where the lighting was coming from. But there were doors and there were windows looking into rooms, and as I was pulled down this corridor with the creature next to me, I was taken into a room. The door was open. They pulled me into this room, and there was all these people standing around. People, humans. They were kind of in the dark, and the Greys were in the front, and they stood around this table, or it was a table. It was like an examination table, but it wasn't metal, at least not that I can recall. It was not very bright in there. They laid me down on this table. They pushed me back. I didn't resist them. I knew that that was not something that was going to help me, and I didn't even know if I could. So they laid me down, and the tall, whitish gray came over the top of me, and she looked at me, and she lifted up this box, this black box, and she kind of showed it to me. It was all black, didn't have any distinguishing features at all, especially in its dark room. Now, this wasn't the first time something like this has happened to me. There were other times when I felt I was in the human realm with the Greys. But something was different, and to this day, I'll never understand quite what that was. But in this particular time, it felt like a very special day, a very special event, and it was. I remembered at that moment, it was my birthday. So, she placed a black box on my chest. I could just see it sitting there. And the lid slid open somehow, and this light started to emerge from it. And it was sort of bluish white. And she looked down into it. And she looked back at me. She looked down into it again. And then she did something I didn't expect. She put her hand down into it. Not all the way, but just dropped her fingers down in there. And then she was in there for a while, and then she pulled out something, which I couldn't make out. There was something in her hand. I could tell the way her hand was. And then she left. And I laid there, and there's all this glowing blue light coming out of it. And then she comes back, and she's got something in her hand, and she puts her hand back in there again. And in my mind, I heard her and other voices in the background. It was indescribable. I heard him say happy birthday. It almost felt like they were trying to sing it. And maybe they were, but I wasn't interpreting it quite that way, or maybe they didn't know quite how to do it. But they were wishing me happy birthday. It was really weird. The whole thing was really strange. I'd never really quite had an experience like that before, at least not one like that. The next thing I knew, my eyes popped open. This is typical. I'll remember stuff consciously, but then when I wake up, I'm either face down in bed or laying on my back, or my covers are removed, I'm off to one side of the bed. And in this case, I believe I was just on top of the covers and my eyes just popped open. I was cold. I was a bit freaked out because nothing had happened in a long, long time. This was the first time in a few years. And in my brain, I heard, "They're back." So sometimes the encounters are very trying. It's like they're dumping a ton of information into my mind, and I'll wake up and I can't remember much, just little glimpses. And it hurts. It's like it hurts in my head. I can't think of another way to describe it. And I just went through this the other day, and I'm still feeling it today. It's been 2 days. But I know there's something in my mind, and I know they put information in there, and I know it'll come out. It might manifest in what I'm writing. Maybe it came out when I wrote the script for this show. Maybe it'll come out in a dream. But I guess the bottom line, that this is for my own good, for our own good, and for their own good. This is a communion. This is an effort. As a race, we are shifting consciousness from an old consciousness to a new consciousness, a very important consciousness, one that will end war, one that will end greed, one that will end hate, one that will start a new era of exploration, not only of the universe, but of consciousness and the mind. Nothing could be more important besides love, and this is all part of love. This is all being facilitated by their efforts and ours down this very long path of communion. And it has been for a very, very long time. And I can see a light at the end of this long path. Colonel Philip Corso once asked the visitors a question. He asked, "What's in the offering for us if we let you into our lives?" They replied, "A new world if you can take it."